Hello, and welcome to Scrum Study. In the last video, we discussed the implement phase, and today we will be taking up another phase in Scrum called the review and retrospect phase. So let's get started with it. The review and retrospect phase is concerned with reviewing the deliverables and the work that has been done, and determining ways to improve the practices and methods used to do project work. In large organizations, the review and retrospect processes may also include convening Scrum of Scrums meetings. Review and retrospect, as defined in a Guide to the Scrum Body of Knowledge, or SBOK guide, is applicable to portfolios, programs, and/or projects in any industry. Products, services, or any other results to be delivered to stakeholders, projects of any size or complexity. Moving on. Let's now have an overview of the review and retrospect phase processes, which are as follows. First of all, we will be talking about demonstrate and validate sprint. In this process, the Scrum team demonstrates the sprint deliverables to the product owner and relevant stakeholders in a sprint review meeting. The purpose of this meeting is to secure approval and acceptance of the product or service by the product owner. The next process is retrospect sprint. In this process, the Scrum Master and Scrum team meet to discuss the lessons learned throughout the sprint. This information is documented as lessons learned which can be applied to future sprints. Often, as a result of this discussion, there may be agreed actionable improvements or updated Scrum guidance body recommendations. We will be learning about the first process, demonstrate and validate sprint. Let's see what are the inputs required to start the process. The source of input in this process is undoubtedly the Scrum core team. Moving on, another important source of input is the sprint deliverables. At the end of each sprint, a product increment or deliverable is completed. The deliverable should possess all features and functionality defined in the user stories included in the sprint and should have been tested successfully. Next source of input is the sprint backlog. The list of the tasks to be executed by the Scrum team in the upcoming sprint is called the sprint backlog. We have the done criteria as another important source of input to discuss now. Done criteria are a set of rules that are applicable to all user stories. A clear definition of done is critical because it removes ambiguity from requirements and helps the team adhere to mandatory quality norms. This clear definition is used to create the done criteria that are an output of the create prioritize product backlog process. A user story is considered done when it is demonstrated to and approved by the product owner who judges it on the basis of the done criteria and the user story acceptance criteria. The table shows an example of the done criteria. It is about a project to design the new variants of a popular sports car at LRA Limited. The done criteria listed for the project are as follows. The design is approved by the Technical Excellence Division. The prototype passes all wind tunnel tests mandated by the Aerodynamics Division. The design is cleared for production by the Intellectual Property Division. The design safety expectations are corroborated by the Safety Division's Design Safety Report. The cost estimation report for the design is approved by the Finance Division. Now, we're going to see the role of the user stories and acceptance criteria as a source of input in the process. Every user story has an associated acceptance criteria. User stories are subjective, so the acceptance criteria provide the objectivity required for the user story to be considered as done or not done during the sprint review. Acceptance criteria provide clarity to the team on what is expected of the user story, remove the ambiguity from requirements, and help in aligning expectations. The product owner defines and communicates the acceptance criteria to the Scrum team. In the sprint review meetings, the acceptance criteria provide the context for the product owner to decide if a user story has been completed satisfactorily. It is important and the responsibility of the Scrum Master to ensure that the product owner does not change the acceptance criteria of a committed user story in the middle of a sprint. The Scrum team must ensure that defined acceptance criteria are appropriate for the user stories and provide clarity regarding the requirements to the Scrum team. Acceptance testing refers to the assessment of the ability of the completed deliverable to meet its acceptance criteria. This provides information to the product owner to help make a decision about approving or rejecting the deliverable. When developing user story acceptance criteria, the following should be considered. Acceptance criteria should not be vague, ambiguous, or too generalized. Defined acceptance criteria should ensure that the team is able to verify that the outcomes are in alignment with the sponsor organization's goals and objectives. So we have our inputs ready. What are we waiting for? Let's see the tools available to make use of the inputs. The tool being used in this process is the Sprint Review Meeting. The Scrum core team members and relevant stakeholders participate in sprint review meetings to accept the deliverables which meet the user story acceptance criteria and reject unacceptable deliverables. These meetings are convened at the end of every sprint. The Scrum team demonstrates the achievements from the sprint, including the new functionalities or products created. This provides an opportunity for the product owner and stakeholders to inspect what has been completed so far and to determine if any changes should be made in the project or processes in subsequent sprints.
Another tool is user story acceptance and/or rejection. After user stories are completed by the Scrum team, they are made available to the product owner for review. The product owner can review the user stories as soon as each is complete, or can review them all in a sprint review meeting convened at the end of the sprint. The product owner accepts the user stories that satisfy the user story acceptance criteria and the done criteria, and rejects those that do not meet the criteria, with feedback about why a user story was rejected. If time is still available in the current sprint, rejected user stories are made available to the team to address the reasons for rejection and are provided again to the product owner in the same sprint for an additional review. At the end of a sprint, any remaining rejected user stories should remain on the prioritized product backlog to be considered for completion in a future sprint.
Well, it's time to see the outputs of the process. The main output generated is the accepted deliverables. Deliverables which meet the user story acceptance criteria are accepted by the product owner. The objective of a sprint is to create potentially shippable deliverables, or product increments, which meet the acceptance criteria defined by the customer and product owner. These are considered accepted deliverables that may be released to the customer if they so desire. A list of accepted deliverables is maintained and updated after each sprint review meeting. If a deliverable does not meet the defined acceptance criteria, it is not considered accepted and will usually be carried forward into a subsequent sprint to rectify any issues. This is highly undesirable because the objective of every sprint is for the deliverables to meet the criteria for acceptance. We're going to talk about the last process in this phase, retrospect sprint. Well, inputs play a major role in the processing of any data. What are the sources of input for retrospect sprint? Let's start with a Scrum Master. A Scrum Master is a facilitator and servant leader who ensures that the Scrum team is provided with an environment conducive to completing the project successfully. The Scrum Master guides, facilitates, and teaches Scrum practices to everyone involved in the project, clears impediments for the team, and ensures that the Scrum processes are being followed. It is the responsibility of the product owner to identify the Scrum Master for a Scrum project. Next is the Scrum team. The Scrum team, sometimes referred to as the development team, is a group or team of people who are responsible for understanding the business requirements specified by the product owner, estimating user stories, and final creation of the project deliverables. Scrum teams are cross-functional and self-organizing. The team decides the amount of work to commit to in a sprint and determines the best way to perform the work. The Scrum team consists of cross-functional team members who carry out all the work involved in creating potentially shippable deliverables, including development, testing, quality assurance, etc. Identifying the Scrum team is the responsibility of the product owner, often in consultation with the Scrum Master. The outputs from Demonstrate and Validate Sprint are also used as a source of input. Accepted deliverables is the most important output generated as part of Demonstrate and Validate Sprint process. Deliverables which meet the user story acceptance criteria are accepted by the product owner. The objective of a sprint is to create potentially shippable deliverables, or product increments, which meet the acceptance criteria defined by the customer and product owner. These are considered accepted deliverables that may be released to the customer if they so desire. A list of accepted deliverables is maintained and updated after each sprint review meeting. If a deliverable does not meet the defined acceptance criteria, it is not considered accepted and will usually be carried forward into a subsequent sprint to rectify any issues. This is highly undesirable because the objective of every sprint is for the deliverables to meet the criteria for acceptance. It's time to see the tool used to work on the inputs being provided. In this process, Retrospect Sprint Meeting. The Retrospect Sprint Meeting is an important element of the Inspect-Adapt Scrum framework, and it is the final step in a sprint. All Scrum team members attend the meeting, which is facilitated or moderated by the Scrum Master. It is recommended but not required for the product owner to attend. One team member acts as a scribe and documents discussions and items for future action. It is essential to hold this meeting in an open and relaxed environment to encourage full participation by all team members. Discussions in the Retrospect Sprint Meeting encompass both what went wrong and what went right. Primary objectives of the meeting are to identify 3 specific items, namely, things the team needs to keep doing, best practices, things the team needs to begin doing, process improvements, and things the team needs to stop doing, process problems and bottlenecks. These areas are discussed and a list of agreed actionable improvements is created. So what do you think will be the output if this process is called Retrospect Sprint? Well, agreed actionable improvements are the primary output of the Retrospect Sprint process. They are the list of actionable items that the team has come up with to address problems and improve processes in order to enhance their performance in future sprints. Now, let's just have a quick wrap-up of what we've learned in this video. So far, we have seen that review and retrospect, as a phase, is concerned with reviewing the deliverables and the work that has been done and determining ways to improve the practices and methods used to do project work. This phase is carried out through processes, Demonstrate and Validate Sprint, and Retrospect Sprint. Hope you've enjoyed the learning process throughout this session. We look forward to seeing you in our next video on release. Until then, keep learning Scrum, and thanks for watching.